There was this little boy in an ice cream parlor holding on lovingly to his ice cream when a big bully came and snatched away that ice cream from this little boy's hands. This little boy knew that there was absolutely no chance for him physically to get back that ice cream from this big, huge man, but his spirit just wouldn't allow him not to fight back for what was his. So he fought back. That little boy, you may define him to be the Nagas. And the big bully, India. Nagas are Indians by circumstance, not by choice. Now, it may offend a good number of you who are highly patriotic Indians, I'm sure. But before you take your judgment call, I hope you take certain facts called history and balance your thoughts out accordingly. Mr. Teja earlier, if you have heard him, have already given you the backgrounds, but since I'm only allowed 20 minutes, if I go through the history, we may have to spend the night here. So I have left behind a written script, a hard copy, giving you basically the background of how the Nagas' whole movement have begun, starting from the early years, even before India had been liberated from the colonial forces. So, for those of you who may be interested to know exactly what did happen there and what is happening now, you can request Professor Kumar to share the copy with you to get your details. But the fact of the matter is this. Take a look at your Indian history and you will not find one single reference of Nagas of the Northeast being reflected in that history book of India. India did not know the Nagas, but neither did the Nagas know the Indians. You see? The only linkage between the Nagas and the Indian continent is the British. You know why? The British came into the Naga territory not for any other reason. The British had started their massive tea plantation in Assam, and the good old headhunters, the Nagas, from the mountains would come down, yoo-hoo, yodel, and take a couple of heads in the tea gardens and run back home, up in the hills. And they were disrupting the whole economy of the British, the tea gardens. And therefore, the British felt that it is important to protect their interest, economic ventures in Assam, and so started the skirmishes with the headhunters, the Nagas, up in the hills. But they had no colonial expansion intent in the hills of Nagaland because there was nothing that Nagaland or the Naga hills could contribute towards their colonial economy. There was nothing at all. The only reason why the British came into the Naga territory, therefore, was only to protect their tea plantation interests. And the simple fact of life was that they stopped the Nagas from headhunting. One good plus point. But beyond that is all a minus point as far as the Nagas are concerned, because it is the only linkage that India could claim, that India was ruled by the British and Nagas were also ruled by the British. The British did not even take control of the whole of Nagas. Like Teja had already, in 1929, when Simon Commission had come to reform the states of Indian Union, the Nagas have said, please leave us alone. We have never been under any foreign domination ever. And if you do go away, we must be left as we were, free. Now, because of that petition, that memorandum that the people of the Nagas had submitted to the Simon Commission Commission's report had an impact in ultimately creating a perspective on the Nagas living in the frontiers into British India Act 1935, where they called Naga Hills excluded area. Okay? It is an act, a legal perspective defining the status of the Nagas. It was excluded from the rest of India, and it was called excluded area. But within the perimeters where the Nagas live, I'm usually very indisciplined with time, so...
No problem, I'll gently remind you.
Okay. Gently so that I don't hear it.
We wish to learn from you, so even if you take some extra time, it doesn't really matter.
And thank you, I don't know where I was.
So the perimeter where the Nagas live.
Excluded area. Excluded area.
Okay, yeah, excluded area. So even when the Britishers were in Nagaland, they had clearly made Nagaland or the Naga Hills excluded from the rest of the Union Reformation system. But there was also the eastern part of the Nagas, the eastern Naga sector, that was defined as unadministered area. It means even the British didn't have a control over this territory in the eastern frontiers. You see? But the moment the British went off, the fact that the legal status has been defined, came the colonial disease that was contracted by the Indian leaders, in which, after suffering the colonial rule for so many years, they decided to become the British again, in as far as the Nagas were concerned. And the invasion began despite the fact that the Nagas had already declared their independence on the 14th of August of 1947. A day before India was independent, Nagas were. But that didn't make any difference as far as you are concerned, or we are concerned. Nagas were that little boy holding on to his freedom, but this big gentleman was not very gentlemanly in invading the territories because it was not a part of India. So when they invaded it, the little boy was just not prepared to give up that little freedom that he enjoyed from time immemorial. And therefore he says, no thank you, we don't need you. But then when you are a bully, you are a bully. So you just won't let go. And so began this whole trouble that has been suffered between India and the Nagas. I'm afraid this is a simple way of presenting a situation, but if you really are keen to know, as I said, you need to go a little deeper. Because, as I said, it will definitely hurt your sentiment when I say, if I were to say, by way of facts of history, I am an Indian by circumstance, not by choice. You see? That's where it lands up to be. Now, the whole situation is also vitiated because of the fact that the leaders of India didn't even know the tribal people as human beings. When India became independent. Jawaharlal Nehru himself, during the Copeland land discussion, had said that there's a long frontier of tribal people that doesn't belong to Burma or doesn't belong to India. That was a time when India was still free from the colonial disease. It was an honest thought, even being expressed by people like Jawaharlal Nehru. A long frontier that doesn't belong to Burma or doesn't belong to India. Those are the honest, uncontaminated thoughts that had been expressed. People like Raja Gopalachari, the Lieutenant Governor of India, had said, Nagas deserve to be independent outside the Indian Union. But all of these personal statements made by personalities of India were just personal opinion, never translated into a national policy. And therefore, with that aggression that was bestowed against the Nagas, the whole world says Nagas are trying to secede from India. For heaven's sake, how do you secede from something that doesn't even belong to you? That you do not belong to? How do you? Can you tell me? How do you secede from something that doesn't belong to you? But that's exactly the whole world's opinion about us, that we are fighting India to secede from the Indian Union. No, we were never a part of India. So how the hell can we secede? We are like that little boy fighting the bully for the last 69 years. And comes this peace agreement finally. And you know, at that time, people like Jawaharlal Nehru has simply thought that this is a little movement, the NNC and the federal government and whatever, is a political movement that has been instigated by Christian missionaries and a few handful of educated Nagas, because at that time there was not too very many Nagas who were educated. So, they said that this is a small fry movement and we should be able to quail it, submerge it within a month or two. That miscalculation was a very serious and costly mistake, because till today we are still fighting that war, and in between then and now, more than 30,000-40,000 of Nagas have died on our side of the fence, and that many more on the Indian side of the fence. They didn't understand the human being that the tribals were. We were not equated with human beings. Our opinion didn't bother them at all. So when the international boundary was demarcated between India and Burma, they took a simple watershed. They didn't even bother that they were on that international boundary that India and Burma share. There were families, my uncles, my aunties living across that stupid international boundary that was created. Just like that. And during that time, not a single opinion has been sought from the tribals who belong there. So, you know, you will, if you were to dig a little deeper, you will find that the international boundary runs through a village called Longwa. The international boundary runs right in the middle of the Chief Ang's residence. So this Chief Ang, who is a chief, crosses the international boundary every other minute without passports. That's the kind of heartless, cold division, totally disrespecting us as human beings. And that's your reality. So the whole situation has been built up like this. I'm sorry, in fact, I have not even started the subject matter itself. Now, so that's the kind of the background within which this Naga movement and the present status, where finally the government of India have understood the unique history, and when you say unique history, Nagas were not a part of India. That's being recognized as a unique situation, even though we are now a part of the Indian Union as a state. They have recognized this uniqueness of our history, and therefore they have begun the negotiation, trying to solve it through a political discourse instead. Okay?